Thank you for visiting Chicken Skin Fireside. Pull up a chair, sit around the campfire, and let's talk about the story of an Alaskan trapper and his multiple encounters with the creature known as Sasquatch. Our story takes place in the remote Etalin Island near Wrangell, Alaska. This is the story told by Dana Jacallan, who was a trapper in that area. It was a cold morning in 1979 where Dana and his hunting partner went out hunting deer in an area that they knew was inhabited by many deer. Dana and his partner took a boat to an inlet where they pulled in just before it got dark. Dana's partner decided to spend the night on the boat and get up early to go hunting. Dana decided to go on shore where he would spend the night. He set up his camp a couple hundred yards off the beach. The plan was to meet up the next morning before dawn and go out hunting deer together. Just before dinner, Dana remembers looking off in the distance at the boat floating in the inlet and seeing the light there. Then he drifted off to sleep peacefully. However, his sleep was rudely interrupted about 1 o'clock that next morning when he felt that his sleeping bag was jerked out from underneath him, similarly as a magician does when they yank a tablecloth off a table. Dana laid there for a few moments trying to process what had occurred to him and trying to wipe the sleep from his eyes. He didn't know if something had happened to his partner or if he tried to wake him quickly to go after some deer in the woods. Dana got up, pulled on his boots, grabbed his rifle, and looked around for his partner to maybe find some explanation for what was going on. Dana looked around and saw that it had snowed about an inch or so on the ground, and that there were footprints heading up into the meadow away from the water. He thought perhaps that was his partner, so he decided to follow those footprints. Dana followed the footprints, stepping in them, in fact, because they were dark and easy to see, starting to wonder what had been going on. Then he stopped. Dana realized that the footprints that he was following were not made by a man. They were the imprints of bare feet, but they were twice the size of his own shoes, which were about size 10. Dana looked around, couldn't see anything in the dark, and listened and couldn't hear anything, but he knew that something was not right. Maybe this was just some sort of prank. He double-checked the safety on his rifle and decided to follow those footprints just to see what happened with them. He started to take a few more steps, looking around as he was doing so, when all of a sudden he stopped. His heart also came to a stop. Up ahead, about 15-20 feet, he saw the outline of a figure standing with one hand on its hip and the other hand on a tree. The creature was enormous. It stood about 7.5 to 8 feet tall and looked very much like the creature portrayed in Harry and the Hendersons. Dana froze with fear as he locked eyes with this creature. The creature wasn't growling or menacing in any way, but his mouth was open and he could see his teeth, maybe in some sort of a smile almost. Instinctively, Dana flipped the safety off on his rifle. He figured that he could probably get a shot off, might even be a killing shot. But as quickly as the thought came to his mind, he wasn't sure that he could if he wanted to. Then, as he was processing all of this, the thought came to his mind, clearly as if somebody had spoken it to him face to face. "Leave us alone," said the voice. Although it wasn't just one voice, it was more than one voice, like a group or a collective group. "Leave me alone," said the voice again. As Dana tried to process what in the world was happening to him, the creature turned and then vanished as if it was not there in the first place. Dana took this same opportunity to turn himself and ran. He ran back to his camp, back to the boat. He told his partner about what had happened, but they waited until daylight had occurred, and then they decided to go back and see if they could find the footprints or figure out what they had seen. But they saw nothing, and never did see anything else the rest of that day. But that wasn't the last time that Dana would have an encounter with this creature, or creatures. About a year and a half after that incident, Dana went out trapping for mink in that same area. Unfortunately, the day after he set the traps out, he came to find that they had all been sprung. He suspected that a wolf might be to blame for that. They've been known to spring traps. So he went back, moved some around, reset some. When he came back the next day, again, they were all sprung. But in one of them, there was a stick left in it. Obviously, a wolf can't do something like that. A third time, Dana set those traps, and the next day came back again. This time, however, all the traps were gone. Dana followed his footprints back the way he came along the trail, trying to figure out what had happened to those traps and what could be doing that. Then he realized that the tracks that he had been following back home weren't his own tracks. They matched the tracks that he had seen a year and a half ago, barefoot and enormous. Dana took it as a warning from the Sasquatch that he should leave, and so Dana headed back to the shore. And just before he got out of the woods into the clearing where the skiff was, he heard some rattling. As he came out of the woodline onto the shore, he saw, right next to his skiff, all his traps in a pile. Dana knew the area well, and he knew that he was the only person around, and he also knew that the rules of the land said that you don't touch another man's traps. Dana left and never came back to that area again. The last encounter Dana had was a little while later, as Dana was felling cedar trees to make a cedar shake shed to store his gear. His dog Henry was by his side. His dog Henry wasn't afraid of anything, not even a wolf. Where most dogs are terrified of even the smell of a wolf, he wasn't afraid of anything. However, on this day, as Dana was cutting down the trees, his dog all of a sudden started to whine and ended up crawling low on his belly all the way to the skiff and climbed onto it without permission, which was something he was trained to never do. His dog Henry then hunkered down under the seat on the skiff. This made Henry think that perhaps they weren't alone, so he grabbed his rifle and decided to walk on the shoreline a little bit. But then he stopped. He got a feeling that they weren't alone, and it's a feeling that he had felt before a couple of times now. As Henry came back to the skiff, he saw that the huge cedar log that he was working on had been carried to the bank and dumped into the cove. He jumped on the skiff, turned around and left, and he never returned to the area again.